a respected doctor, a family man, a church president. Some of the most horrifying murderers in history hid behind masks of normalcy. In this countdown, we'll rip off those masks to reveal the true faces of evil. From Harold Shipman, the trusted physician who killed hundreds of patients, to Dennis Rader, the BTK killer who led a double life for decades. Stay safe as we take a look at some of the most infamous serial killers in history. Joseph James DeAngelo. They say the best place to hide is in plain sight, but what happens when the person sworn to protect you is actually hunting you? Enter Joseph James DeAngelo, a man who turned his police uniform into the perfect disguise for terror. From 1973 to 1976, he served as a police officer in the Auburn Police Department in California. To his colleagues, he was a quiet and reserved individual, earning their trust and respect. Little did they know that behind that badge lurked a predator of unimaginable cruelty. DeAngelo's law enforcement experience gave him a deadly edge. He used his insider knowledge to stay ahead of investigators, exploiting the very systems designed to catch criminals like him. DeAngelo often targeted young women and couples, carefully selecting his victims and stalking them before launching his attacks. As the years passed and the attacks continued, the Golden State Killer became a boogeyman-like figure in California law. Residents installed new locks, formed neighborhood watch groups, and slept with weapons nearby. But no matter how many precautions they took, the feeling of safety remained elusive. How could they protect themselves when the monster wore a badge? For decades, the Golden State Killer's identity remained a mystery. Then in 2018, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: genetic genealogy. By tracing DNA from crime scenes through public genealogy databases, they were able to construct a family tree that led them straight to Joseph James DeAngelo. The arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer was a moment of reckoning for those who had known him as a police officer. Former colleagues were left reeling, struggling to reconcile the dedicated officer they thought they knew with the monster he truly was. As part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, he admitted to 13 murders, acknowledging the decades of terror he had inflicted to the communities of California. DeAngelo was sentenced to life without parole in 2020. But as we'll see in our next story, DeAngelo wasn't the only killer to use a position of authority to carry out his heinous crimes. In fact, our next subject took the betrayal of trust to an even more disturbing level, using his medical expertise to become one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Harold Shipman. Imagine a doctor so trusted he signed off on 70% of local death certificates. Now picture that same doctor deliberately ending those lives. Shipman's method of killing was as insidious as it was efficient. He would visit his victims, often under the guise of a routine checkup. Once alone with the patient, Shipman would administer a lethal dose of diamorphine, a powerful opioid. The unsuspecting victims would quickly succumb to the overdose, their deaths appearing natural to the untrained eye. But Shipman's crimes didn't end with the act of murder. To cover his tracks, he meticulously falsified medical records and death certificates. He would insert symptoms and conditions that would make the deaths seem plausible. This attention to detail allowed him to operate undetected for years, as grieving families had no reason to question the respected doctor's word. The beginning of the end for Harold Shipman came in 1998 when he made a crucial mistake. One of his victims, a wealthy widow named Kathleen Grundy, died suddenly, leaving behind a will that raised eyebrows. The document, crudely typed and full of errors, left a substantial sum of money to none other than Dr. Shipman himself. This uncharacteristic request set off alarm bells for Grundy's family, who contacted the authorities. The investigation that followed unravelled Shipman's web of deceit. Police exhumed bodies, analysed medical records, and interviewed families of the deceased. The evidence was damning. Not only had Shipman murdered Kathleen Grundy, but his trail of victims stretched back for years. In January 2000, Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison. But the story doesn't end there. In 2004, Shipman took his own life in his prison cell, leaving behind a legacy of horror and terror. The scale of Shipman's crimes is truly staggering. While he was initially charged with 15 murders, subsequent investigations suggest the true number of victims could be as high as 250. This would make Harold Shipman one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. Brace yourself, because we're about to meet a man who used a very different kind of sweetness to lure his victims to their demise. A candy shop owner whose generosity masked a sinister appetite for young boys. But before we continue, who do you think really manipulated his community's trust? Harold Shipman or Joseph James DeAngelo? Let me know down in the comments below. Now back to the video. Dean Corll. In the quiet Houston neighborhood of Heights, Dean Corll was known as the Candyman. His family's candy shop, strategically located across from a school, made him a beloved figure in the community. Children flocked to his store, drawn by his generous nature and the promise of free sweets. Corll's public persona as a friendly candy shop owner stood in stark contrast to the monster that emerged behind closed doors. He used his position of trust to lure unsuspecting victims, exploiting their innocence and the community's goodwill. He enlisted 2 young accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, to help him select and lure victims. These teenagers, initially drawn into Corll's web through manipulation and abuse, became integral to his killing spree. Between 1970 and 1973, Corll is believed to have murdered at least 28 young boys, often targeting vulnerable youths from troubled backgrounds, making them easy targets for his manipulation. He would offer them candy, money, or alcohol, luring them to his home under the guise of a party or a friendly gathering. Once there, the true horror would unfold. The true extent of Corll's crimes wouldn't be revealed until 1973, when his reign of terror came to an unexpected end. In a twist that could have been ripped from a horror movie, it was one of Corll's own accomplices who finally stopped the killing spree. Elmer Wayne Henley, who had assisted Corll for years, found himself in a life-or-death situation when Corll threatened to kill him and 2 other teenagers he had brought to the house. In a moment of desperation, Henley managed to get hold of Corll's gun, fatally shooting the man who had terrorized Houston for years. When police arrived at the scene, they uncovered a house of horrors that would shock even the most hardened investigators. The case completely shattered the sense of security in the Heights neighborhood. Our next story takes us from the candy shop to the college campus, where another predator used his good looks and charisma to mask his deadly intentions. Get ready to meet a man whose charm was as lethal as any weapon. Ted Bundy, the killer who could have been the boy next door. Ted Bundy, a name that resonates through the annals of American criminal history as one of the most infamous serial killer. Bundy's method for luring victims was as simple as it was effective. He often pretended to be injured or in need of assistance, playing on the kindness of strangers, particularly young women. With his arm in a fake cast or leaning on crutches, he'd approach his targets in public places, asking for help. This tactic allowed Bundy to disarm his victims' natural defences. After all, who would suspect a clean-cut, apparently vulnerable young man of harbouring such dark intentions? Once he had gained their trust, the trap was sprung. His charisma allowed him to blend seamlessly into society, making it difficult for people to suspect him of being a serial killer. As the body count rose and the hunt for the killer intensified, Bundy's behaviour became increasingly brazen. His ability to manipulate those around him extended to the courtroom, where he often acted as his own attorney. These performances showcased his intelligence and charm, captivating the media and the public alike. Even as evidence mounted against him, Bundy maintained an air of innocence, playing to the cameras with the skill of a seasoned actor. But it was Bundy's overconfidence that ultimately led to his downfall. After escaping custody twice, he believed he could continue his killing spree without consequence. This hubris proved to be his undoing. In 1978, after fleeing to Florida and committing several more brutal murders, Bundy was finally captured for the last time. His calm demeanour and articulate responses during the trial only served to underscore the chilling disconnect between his outward appearance and the monster within. In total, Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders, and he was executed on January 24, 1989, by electric chair, bringing an end to one of the most cunning serial killer in human history. If you are still shocked by Ted Bundy's ability to blend into society while committing such atrocities, then brace yourself. We're about to meet a man who took the concept of a killer disguise to a whole new level, a children's entertainer whose clown makeup concealed a basement full of horrors. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne's double life makes us wonder, how well do we really know our neighbours? In the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy was a pillar of his Illinois community, known as Pogo the Clown. He delighted children at parades and hospitals, bringing joy with his colourful makeup and goofy antics. But Gacy's clown persona wasn't just a hobby, it was a crucial part of his public image, allowing him to gain trust and access to families throughout the area. But behind this carefully crafted facade of normalcy lurked a predator of unimaginable cruelty. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy's home in Norwood Park became a house of horror. He would torture and strangle his victims, often keeping their bodies for extended periods before disposing of them. His reign of terror unfolded when he confessed his crimes to his lawyers in March 1980. This admission set in motion a chain of events that would expose the true extent of his depravity. When investigators searched Gacy's house, they uncovered a scene straight out of a nightmare. Beneath the floorboards, they found a crawl space that had become a makeshift graveyard. As forensic teams carefully excavated the area, they discovered 29 victims buried in that cramped space, many covered with lime and encased in plastic. In the end, John Wayne Gacy was charged with the murders of 33 young men and boys. He spent 14 years on death row before finally facing execution by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. But the scars he left on his community and on the American psyche would never fully heal. Who do you think was able to perfectly mask their true intentions? For Ted Bundy, hit the like button. For John Wayne Gacy, hit the subscribe button. All done, let's continue. Get ready to step inside H.H. Holmes' murder castle, a hotel where checking in was easy, but checking out was impossible. H.H. Holmes. As the 1893 World's Fair dazzled Chicago with visions of the future, one man has a far more sinister plan in mind. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes, is believed to be one of USA's first serial killers. Holmes began construction of a 3-story building that would become infamous as the Murder Castle. From the outside, it looked like any other grand hotel of the era, but inside, a carefully designed killing machine that would make even the most hardened true crime enthusiast shudder. The layout was a nightmare come to life. The hotel had soundproof rooms with secret gas lines which allowed Holmes to dispatch guests at will, hidden chutes which sent bodies straight to the basement, where acid vats and a crematorium awaited. And let's not forget the torture chambers for those unfortunate souls he wanted to keep around a bit longer. Holmes made his building very confusing. Stairs went nowhere, some hallways ended in walls, and some rooms could only be found through hidden doors. It was a disorienting maze meant to confuse and trap victims, giving Holmes complete control over their fate. As the World's Fair brought a flood of visitors to Chicago, Holmes's hotel became a hunting ground. He preyed on young women, luring them with promises of employment or romance. But once inside, they never stood a chance. In 1894, Holmes's luck finally ran out. He was arrested in Boston for an unrelated crime, a horse swindle gone wrong. This seemingly minor incident set off a chain of events that would unravel Holmes's carefully constructed world. As investigators dug deeper, the true nature of his Chicago hotel began to emerge. Police uncovered a house of horrors beyond anyone's darkest imaginings. The basement, with its dissection table and lime pits, told a story of unimaginable cruelty. Holmes would confess to 27 murders, though some estimate the true number could be much higher. H.H. Holmes was eventually hanged for his crimes in 1896, bringing an end to one of the most disturbing chapters in American criminal history. In our next story, we're about to meet a monster who was able to blend seamlessly into society. Dennis Rader. His neighbours saw a man who mowed his lawn and attended PTA meetings. But behind that friendly smile lurked a monster so terrifying he'd send shivers down the spine of even the most hardened true crime enthusiast. Rader approached murder with the same methodical precision he applied to his day job as a compliance officer. Every detail was carefully considered, from selecting his victims to covering his tracks. His method of binding, torturing, and killing victims led to his infamous moniker as the BTK Killer. He taunted police and media by sending letters describing his gruesome crimes in horrifying details. In these messages, he referred to his victims with a chilling detachment, showcasing a level of emotional disconnect that allowed him to compartmentalize his horrific deeds from his everyday life. As the years ticked by, the BTK Killer became something of an urban legend in Wichita. Parents warned their children to lock their doors at night, while amateur sleuths traded theories about the killer's identity. All the while, Dennis Rader continued to lead his church, raise his family, and participate in community events. The cognitive dissonance is almost too much to bear. How could someone so deeply involved in their community harbour such dark secrets? After years of evading capture, the BTK Killer decided to reach out to police once again. This time he asked if it would be safe to send them a floppy disk. When they assured him it couldn't be traced, Rader took the bait. Little did he know that small piece of plastic would be his undoing. Investigators quickly traced the disk back to Christ Lutheran Church, and suddenly the pieces started falling into place. The respected church president, the family man, the community leader. It had been Dennis Rader all along. As Rader was led away in handcuffs, his neighbours and friends were left to grapple with a horrifying truth. Evil doesn't always wear a scary mask. Sometimes it hides behind a friendly smile and a helping hand. Rader confessed to 10 murders and was sentenced to 10 life sentences on August 18, 2005. Now let's take a look at another name that will definitely send shivers down your spine. Israel Keyes, a predator who took the concept of premeditation to terrifying new heights. Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes wasn't your typical serial killer. He was a US Army veteran with extensive survival training. However, Keyes applied his military expertise to a chilling new purpose: murder. What set Keyes apart was his methodical approach to killing. This wasn't a man driven by impulse or passion. Instead, Keyes treated murder as a long-term project, meticulously planning his crimes years in advance. He would travel across the country, carefully selecting locations for his murder kits, caches of weapons, tools, and supplies buried in remote areas. These kits allowed him to strike without warning, leaving no trail back to his home in Alaska. Unlike most serial killers who develop a specific victim profile, he preferred isolated areas and vulnerable individuals. This made him incredibly difficult to track, as there was no discernible pattern to his crimes. But even the most careful killers make mistakes. For Keyes, his downfall came in the form of a single misstep. After abducting and murdering Samantha Koenig in Alaska, Keyes broke his own rules. Instead of disappearing without a trace, he used Koenig's debit card to withdraw money from ATMs across the southwestern United States. This financial trail gave investigators their first real lead. The FBI followed this financial trail, leading to Keyes' arrest in Texas, thousands of miles from his last known crime. On December 2, 2012, while in custody, Israel Keyes committed suicide in his jail cell using a razor blade he had obtained. His death left many questions about his other potential victims unanswered, as he had hinted at having killed others during interviews. Now, if you thought these killers were brazen, wait until you see the sheer nerve and ingenuity behind the most audacious and daring heists ever pulled off. In this video, we'll explore the stories of some of the most daring and successful heists ever committed. From stealing $500 million in arts to $1 billion stolen from a country's central bank. These stories will leave you on the edge of your seat. Click the video on screen to watch it.